The screen is blue. White text, a menu bar along the bottom. F1 Help, F3 Save, F7 Exit. If you worked in an American office in 1993, you did not just recognize this screen, you lived on it. This is WordPerfect 5.1, and at its peak, it ran on the machines of roughly 4 out of 5 people in the country who wrote for a living. 5 years later, it was effectively gone, and it did not go alone. One rival, one move, a decision its customers never saw. Inside that same short window, 2 other companies, each the undisputed king of its own market, fell exactly the same way. Law firms ran on WordPerfect, newsrooms ran on it, Congress ran on it. Then the document reopens in Microsoft Word on a Windows 95 desktop, and the box goes into a drawer it never comes back out of. 3 kingdoms: words, numbers, and networks. One weapon. This is how Microsoft Office took all 3. First, the empire the weapon brought down. WordPerfect came out of Orem, Utah. In 1979, a computer science professor named Alan Ashton and a graduate student named Bruce Bastian wrote a word processor for a city government's mini-computer. Bastian had come to Brigham Young University as a music major and directed the Cougar Marching Band. Years before either wrote a line of word processing code, the first real program they built together charted marching band halftime formations, working out where each player should stand on the field. Arranging hidden structure beneath a visible surface was the instinct he began with. Within a few years, their program had dethroned the reigning champion, WordStar, and kept climbing. The 1989 release, version 5.1, was the peak. Fast, deep, and so standard in the legal world that reveal codes. Its trick of splitting the screen to expose the hidden formatting layer beneath a clean document lived in the fingertips of a generation of paralegals. By the early 90s, WordPerfect held most of the DOS word processing market, somewhere between 60 and 85% depending on how you count, and higher than that inside law firms. That dominance rested on more than software. WordPerfect became the first software publisher to run a toll-free support line. Unlimited and free, a secretary could call on its dime and stay on as long as the problem took. When help was scarce and metered by the minute, that bought fierce loyalty among the paralegals and legal secretaries who made 5.1 the standard. As the customer base grew into the millions, that open-ended promise curdled into a liability. In May 1990, Microsoft shipped Windows 3.0, and the whole industry began sliding off text-based DOS toward the mouse and Windows world. WordPerfect had an answer for that world, eventually. Its Windows version did not arrive until late 1991, about 18 months behind Windows itself, and roughly 2 years behind Microsoft's own Word for Windows, and reviewers found it slow and crash-prone. For a company whose entire reputation was reliability, showing up late and broken to the biggest platform shift in the industry was close to a death sentence by itself. It was made fatal by what Microsoft was assembling right next door, the thing that killed the other 2 as well. WordPerfect's owners tried to buy their way out. In March 1994, the networking giant Novell acquired WordPerfect in a stock deal announced at $1.4 billion, plus a spreadsheet called Quattro Pro for another $145 million in cash, meaning to assemble a rival suite. By the time the deal closed that June, Novell's stock had sagged enough that the real price of WordPerfect was nearer $855 million. 20 months later, in early 1996, Novell gave up and sold the whole business to Corel for a package worth somewhere between $110 and $185 million. The most popular word processor on Earth had changed hands twice and shed the better part of $1 billion in value in under 2 years. Bastian had chaired the board through the climb, and in the same years it crested and slipped from his hands. He was carrying a hidden layer of his own. On trips to Europe, he had, for the first time, watched gay men live in the open. One king down. The second had done something even rarer. It created the market it went on to rule. Before Excel, before Google Sheets, the spreadsheet was Lotus 123. When it launched in 1983, it did the thing software almost never does. It sold the hardware. Businesses bought the IBM PC specifically to run it. By the late 80s, it held around 70% of the spreadsheet market, and by one 1987 count, 1 in 4 business PC users worked inside it. WordPerfect owned the memo. Lotus owned the budget. 123 was a DOS champion, and it was slow to move to Windows. Microsoft's Excel, built for the graphical world early, passed it around 1992, exactly as the Windows migration accelerated. IBM bought Lotus in 1995, weeks before Windows 95 shipped, and IBM's own agenda left 123 without the fight to recover. It never crossed into the Windows era. The third king ruled something you never saw on a screen at all. In 1992, if your office had more than a couple of computers talking to each other, the software making that happen was almost certainly Novell NetWare, and it is the one most people have forgotten. NetWare was the plumbing of the early corporate network, the system that let a floor of PCs share files, printers, and logins. At its height, it ran the majority of PC networks on Earth. Estimates range from about 60% up toward 90%, and being a certified NetWare engineer was a whole career. Novell sold something one layer beneath the apps, and it was erased anyway because Microsoft built networking straight into Windows. Beginning with Windows NT Server in 1993, running a network stopped being something you bought from Novell and became something that shipped in the box with your Microsoft operating system. By the end of the decade, Microsoft had taken the lead in the market Novell had built. 3 companies, 3 markets, 3 kings, all off their thrones inside a single decade. Told one at a time, these become 3 separate obituaries. WordPerfect was late to Windows, Lotus bet wrong, Novell got lazy. Set side by side, they turn into one story told 3 times, driven by a single repeatable move. The move had 2 halves. The first was the bundle. In October 1990, Microsoft stopped selling its word processor, its spreadsheet, and its presentation program as separate products and packaged Word, Excel, and PowerPoint into one box called Microsoft Office. Buying comparable pieces one at a time from different vendors could run well past $1,000. The suite landed around $800 or $900, roughly the price of a single application and a half for all 3. The customer only had to notice that a good enough suite from one company cost less than the best-of-breed parts from 3. That pricing rode on a deliberate design choice. Microsoft treated Office as a single product, the same menus, the same keyboard shortcuts, copy and paste that behaved identically everywhere, a strategy one of its own executives, Steven Sinofsky, later laid out in an internal memo. A rival stitching a suite together out of WordPerfect, Quattro Pro, and some third company's presentation tool could never match that feel because those parts were never built to fit. Underneath the price sat a deeper trap, the file itself. Microsoft's Word saved to a binary format called .doc and Excel to .xls, both kept proprietary, undocumented, and revised often. A memo written in Word opened cleanly only in Word. A rival like WordPerfect or 123 had to reverse engineer each new revision, and was always a version behind on reading it. For a law firm with a decade of documents on its servers, the files were the lock. Any of them might fail to lay out right anywhere else, and most firms would not gamble on it. Critics later named the pattern embrace, extend, extinguish. Adopt a standard, add proprietary extensions that quietly break it, then lock out the rivals who followed the old one. Microsoft's defenders call the formats a plain engineering necessity. Either way, the lock-in held, even after a formal standards fight. An open format made an international standard in 2006. Microsoft's own fast-track to one in 2008 amid heavy controversy. .docx, .xlsx, and .pptx are still the default way the world trades a document. The second half of the move was the platform, and Novell is the proof of it. Microsoft did not only sell the applications, it owned the ground they all stood on, Windows. Every one of these companies had to build for Microsoft's operating system, which meant Microsoft saw the terrain first and decided what it would become next. Bundle the apps so the customer buys yours. Own the platform so every rival builds on ground you control. Do both at once, and whoever holds that ground sets the terms of the fight. And Microsoft held all of it. Owning the platform was more than a technical fact. It was written into the contracts that put Windows on new machines. Through the early 90s, Microsoft signed computer makers to per-processor licenses. The builder paid a royalty on every machine it shipped with a given chip, whether or not that machine ran Microsoft software at all. Load a rival system? Novell's DR-DOS, say. And the manufacturer paid twice, once to Novell and once to Microsoft, for a copy it never installed. Almost no builder would swallow that double royalty, so almost none offered the rival at all. The Justice Department called it unlawful monopoly maintenance. And on July 15, 1994, Microsoft signed a consent decree banning per-processor deals and license terms longer than a year. The separate damages fight over DR-DOS ran on as its own case, Caldera versus Microsoft, settled in 2000. The bundle and the platform were the structure. There was also the clock. Through these same years, Microsoft was repeatedly accused of a tactic the trade press named vaporware, announcing a product or a ship date well before the software existed, so buyers weighing a rival's finished program against a promised Microsoft one would wait. And every month of waiting froze the rival's shipping sales. The charge surfaced in a 1994 federal court hearing reviewing that consent decree. It was never proven, and Microsoft denied it. Even so, the tactic fit the rest. A rival could be stalled without a single competing line of code ever shipping. The easy version of this story has a clear villain. The court record complicates him. In the discovery for a later lawsuit, an email surfaced dated October 3, 1994, in which Bill Gates directed his team to withhold certain Windows 95 programming interfaces from outside developers. Interfaces WordPerfect needed. His reasoning was a single sentence. Withholding them, he wrote, will give Office a real advantage. Novell's case, years later, was that this forced WordPerfect to re-engineer and pushed its Windows 95 release to May 1996, 9 months after Windows 95 shipped, an eternity in that market, and long enough for Office to lock in for good. The memo is real, and the intent is right there in Gates' own words. And Novell still lost. In 2013, a federal appeals court ruled that Microsoft had no legal duty to hand rivals those interfaces, and the Supreme Court declined to hear it the next year. That ruling splits cleanly in two. A giant used every legal lever it had, its grip on Windows included, to bury smaller companies. And those same companies stumbled badly on their own. Late, buggy, slow to read the shift, and the law does not exist to rescue a firm from being outcompeted. Both were true at once. The bundle never needed a crime to work. That private suit was one of 3 separate legal fronts, and they get mashed into a single Microsoft antitrust case that never really existed. The one most people remember came in May 1998, when the Justice Department and 20 states sued under the Sherman Act over a wholly different target, tying the Internet Explorer browser to Windows to crush Netscape. Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson found Microsoft a monopoly in November 1999 and ordered a breakup the following year. An appeals court threw the breakup out in 2001, and the government settled for disclosure rules instead. The other two you have already seen. The 1994 consent decree over per-processor licensing at the factory, and Novell's private suit over the WordPerfect interfaces, filed in 2004 and lost in 2013. A browser, a set of Office interfaces, a licensing clause, different courts, different products, different decades, and Microsoft kept its shape through all 3. By the time the 3 kings understood the new rules, Office was already the default and the drawers were already closing. Word would pass 90% of its market by 2000. Excel became the number the world runs on, and the plumbing came free with Windows. None of these kingdoms is quite as dead as the story usually implies. WordPerfect never disappeared. Corel still sells it, still courting the legal niche with pleading numbers, redaction, and the old reveal codes. Lotus 123, the program that once sold the personal computer, was discontinued in 2013, and IBM ended support on September 30th, 2014. Its sister product, Lotus Notes, outlasted everything. IBM sold it to India's HCL for $1.8 billion in 2018, and HCL still ships it. The thrones are gone. A few of the kings are still breathing, in law offices and government basements and server rooms, tenants now on the platform Microsoft owns, which leaves the man who began with hidden structure beneath the surface. Around 1993, as the company he co-founded was being sold out from under him, Bruce Bastian told his wife, his 4 sons, and the Latter-day Saint community he had been raised in that he was gay. He had been devout his whole life, a mission to Italy, a temple marriage, years as a lay clergyman, and the awakening that had begun quietly on those European trips had come slowly. The marriage ended in divorce. He left the church. The Novell sale had made him wealthy, and he spent the next 30 years doing the opposite of hiding. 2 decades on the board of the Human Rights Campaign, his name and his money thrown against California's Proposition 8 and his own state's ban on same-sex marriage. He died in 2024. It is our lens and not his, but the co-founder who built the feature that split the screen to reveal the hidden layer under every clean page had kept his own layer hidden for decades, and then, disclosure by disclosure, ran reveal codes on his own life. In the end, that was the one thing he stopped hiding. If you want more stories like this one, the companies that ruled an industry right up until someone else changed the rules,